This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So yes, I'm giving a series of talks, so I am going to be unfolding themes through the series, and you'll get most if you listen to them as a series. So the one I did last week is available on our website. It's on the homepage of the website. You can listen to it if you missed it. But I'm going to start by picking up on something from that talk, just to clarify something I said last week. So I was looking at this theme of challenging Dharma for challenging times, and I was looking at what are the challenges in the times that we live in. And I boiled it down to two things: individualism and materialism, and the challenges that these present. So if you want to explore that more, you can listen to that talk. But I said something in passing when I was trying to define what individualism is. I mentioned something of Margaret Thatcher, her famous quote of "there is no such thing as society." And I just thought I'd clarify something around that. So what I take her to mean by "there is no such thing as society" is that the sort of social and economic forces of conditioning upon an individual should have no real effect. The individual is free to act completely independently of those conditioning forces. That's what I understand her to mean. To me, that is an extreme view. Yeah? From a Buddhist position, that's one extreme. But I only quoted that extreme view. You could have the other extreme view, which is there's no such thing as individual responsibility. Everybody is just a product of their social, economic, familial conditioning, and they have no individual responsibility within that. I'm just saying that because I didn't want to associate myself with any particular political position. Those two views I've announced, I think, are both extreme views from a Buddhist position. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do in these talks is clarify what the genuine Buddhist position is, not to take up a particular political view in opposition to others. Although I was critiquing individualism, and Margaret Thatcher, I thought was giving an expression to a very individualistic view in that statement. Anyway, that's just by the by. I'm just unfolding themes, but just trying to clarify things as we go along. So tonight I'm going to look at the first of the Four Noble Truths. So again, I spoke a little bit about the whole notion of a truth and coming into relationship with the truth last week. But yes, we're going to look at this truth of Dukkha. It's very interesting that it comes first in the Four Noble Truths. It's a little essay of Sangharakshita's called "Where Buddhism Begins and Why It Begins There." It's from his early period, written in the 1950s. And he says Buddhism begins with the experience of Dukkha. So it does not begin with an idea, some fancy philosophy, some nice concepts. Begins with Dukkha. And it begins with Dukkha because that is an actual, direct, it's not that it's not rational at all, but it's something much more than just a rational experience, something we feel. And that is the basis, or in a way that gives us the motive for spiritual life and practice. In a way, if there wasn't Dukkha in our lives, well, why bother? Yeah, we don't need to practice the spiritual life. So Dukkha is absolutely key to the Buddhist understanding of spiritual life. It is a response to Dukkha. In the formulation of the Four Noble Truths, it's a bit like you're doing a medical diagnosis. Dukkha is the symptoms, craving is the cause, or tanha, nibbana is the end of the symptoms, and then the Eightfold Path is the way to relieve yourself of those symptoms. It's a kind of standard way of looking at a medical problem in the India of the Buddha's time. But how we frame and understand what Dukkha is, in a way, in the light of what I've said, the way we understand Dukkha shapes our whole understanding of what the Buddhist path is. Because the Buddhist path is dealing with the experience of dukkha. If you understand dukkha just as sort of physical symptoms of pain, well, just simple mindfulness practices is probably all you're going to be able to do to deal with that. Yeah. Anyway, so the understanding of what dukkha is crucial to your whole understanding, our whole understanding of what the Dharma is. And I'm going to go on. I'm going to look at some of the traditional sources or the traditional ways of describing dukkha, and then I'm going to look at a more modern, or as it were, sort of contemporary understanding of dukkha in the world that we're in. One thing just to say before we start looking at some details. Dukkha, the fact that we experience dukkha, dukkha doesn't equal failure. Yeah, I think it's very easy for us in the modern world to see dukkha. If we're experiencing dukkha, somehow we've failed. We're a failed human being. We're not good enough. We're not able to do what all the images on our big screens and all the information we have shows that this great triumphant individual who can lead this wonderfully successful life and surmount all difficulties and overcome everything. Yeah, that's kind of what we're presented with. That's kind of individualism myth in a way, you could say. So when we're looking at dukkha, if you find yourself doing that equation, I'm suffering and therefore I've failed, please try and unpick that. That's not a helpful approach, and that's not what we're trying to do as Buddhists in terms of turning towards dukkha. Dukkha does not equal failure. What dukkha is information. Yeah? Dukkha tells us very, very important things about our life. And if we ignore that dukkha, we build our life on a false premise. Yeah, this is why it's a truth. Buddha talks about it as the truth of dukkha, the truth of suffering, the first noble truth. Yeah? If we don't acknowledge the information of dukkha going on in our lives, we build a kind of life on a false premise. Yeah? So think of dukkha as information on which you can actually rightfully engage your energies in your life in the kind of correct way. Yeah. So yes, without dukkha, we're living without turning towards and acknowledging, recognizing dukkha, we build our life on a false premise. Okay, so I'm going to look at two instances of dukkha associated with the life of the Buddha to begin with. They're probably things that you are familiar with. So I'm looking at these again because they provide the whole motive that led to the Buddha taking up the quest for enlightenment that he did. Yeah? So we've got the very traditional story of the 4 sights. So this, in all likelihood, never actually happened to the Buddha, certainly in this way. It's a kind of teaching story, a very effective one and a very good one, but it's unlikely to have actually happened to the Buddha in the way that's described. You'll know the story. The Buddha, Siddhartha, before he's enlightened, very sheltered life. In the fullness of youth, he's got full health and vitality. He's got a lot of privilege in his background. He's not encountered the facts of existence, and he takes these 3 trips outside of whatever his palace or his rich home, and he sees the old person, the sick person, and the dead body. Goes out, has 3. Satyamaga's very good. She tells these stories very well on the intro courses. He goes out 3 times. He's with Channa, his charioteer. I'm sure you've all got your charioteer who takes you out on rides every now and then. And it hits home. The reality, in a way, he's supposed to overcome the intoxication of youth, the intoxication of health, and the intoxication of life. These 3 sights, the first 3 sights, disabuse him of those intoxications. Yeah, the sort of fullness of I've got youth, I've got health, I've got life. I don't need to look at anything beyond that. So the sort of shutters come away and he starts to see life more clearly. So this is often talked about as the motive for the Buddha going out on his quest, yeah? He then sees the fourth sight, the wandering holy man, and that's what gives him the way forward. If we base our understanding of Buddhism on this, we've got a very kind of individual sense of dukkha. Old age, sickness and death are things. This is one of the great strengths of this story, is it's universal. Yeah, those things are going to happen to all of us. Nobody escapes them. But it is a very kind of individual understanding of dukkha. That's something that I will just experience. I will get old, I will get sick, and I will die. Yeah. So I want to just draw attention to another incident from the Buddha's life. I mentioned it last week. It's the Atadanda Sutta. It's a text I keep coming back to. One of the things Sangharakshita is very good at is he'll sort of uncover little suttas from the Pali Canon that have been overlooked by the tradition, like the Gaurava Sutta, the teaching on gratitude. And he's made, he's drawn out all sorts of dharmic riches from that. Or the Upanishad Sutta, which is the one that has the positive Nidana chain in it. So the Theravadins, who kind of have been the guardians and preservers of these texts, they've sort of not seen any significance in these. And I think the Atadanda Sutta is another one of these suttas that when you look at it and you start to take it on board, it actually has big implications for the Dharma. So I'll read you at least part of it again. Some of you will be familiar with it because I've read it before. But this is the Buddha. It's very striking in the text. It's not a repetitive formulaic teaching. It's got the Buddha speaking in a sort of very direct, strong, first-person voice. So it seems to describe something much more real and authentic in his experience, rather than him just listing, there's the Four Noble Truths or the three sights and just going through something in a formulaic way. So this is what he says. Fear is born from arming oneself. Just see how many people fight. I'll tell you about the dreadful fear that caused me to shake all over. Seeing creatures flopping around like fish in water too shallow, so hostile to one another. Seeing this, I became afraid. This world completely lacks essence. It trembles in all directions. I longed to find myself a place unscathed, but I could not see it. Seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. But then I discerned here a thorn, hard to see, lodged deep in the heart. It's only when pierced by this thorn that one runs in all directions. So if that thorn is taken out, one does not run and settles down. It does go on a little bit longer, there's a few more verses. So this thorn, he's identifying a cause for the running around and the conflict. But it describes this experience of witnessing people in conflict, gives the image of the fish in water that's slowly evaporating in the heat of the Indian summer, and these fish are fighting for their lives over reduced resources. Very, very strong image. And the Buddha is he's terrified at seeing this. I presume this is before his enlightenment. He's terrified of seeing this conflict that goes on in the world around him and beings in struggle and conflict with each other. So this gives, in a way, perhaps a much more plausible motive for why he went on his quest, to find an answer to the fear that overcame him when he saw beings in conflict. So this, in a way, this I think is talking about what you might call a social or collective dukkha, or a relational dukkha. It's not just me experiencing sickness, old age and death, for myself, although I still will experience that, is talking about all the dukkha that comes about through living in a world with others and the kinds of things we do to each other. Yeah, we create a lot of karmic kind of wreckage and mayhem in the world around us and for each other, and it goes round and it goes round and it goes round and it goes round. That's what the wheel of life is. Yeah. So it's this is my thinking, but I think this brings out a very different aspect to the problem of dukkha. Yeah, so I'm saying how you define dukkha shapes your path. If you define it in a very individualistic way, or individual way anyway, of like we're all going to get sick, we're going to get old and we're all going to die, you come up with a dharma that deals with that. If you see dukkha as being about social, relational, collective issues, you have to come up with a dharma that works for that as well. So in a way, I'm not putting it as in total opposition. I'm just saying I think sometimes in the dharma there is not enough attention given to this collective aspect of dukkha. So it's something I've had to work out for myself, my own personal experience. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I came across the Dharma and I know all the stories of the Dharma. I know the stories of the four sights and I know what dukkha is usually talked about as. So I was sort of, in a way, I allowed all the teaching about dukkha to sort of be my understanding of it, but my actual experience wasn't like that. I'm not that old yet. I'm not about to die as yet. I've had one or two, I've had one sort of ongoing kind of health issue, but it's not been a major one. That's not been the main source of dukkha for me that has led me to take up the spiritual path. So, because I've heard it, that's the way that the Buddha did it, and that's the way that the tradition talks about it, I've assumed that must be the case. Actually, for me, my primary experience of dukkha in this life has been violence from another person. And it's left a very deep kind of scar. It happened to me when I was young. It happened from someone I knew. And in a way, that's been a much stronger motivator for me to find a life that can deal with the kind of pain caused by that violence. Yeah? But it's taken me a long time to, there's like a sort of a disjuncture between what I've heard the tradition saying and what my experience has been. And in a way, coming across the Atadanda Sutta, it's kind of helped me to make sense of it. Yeah. But I look around me and I see an awful lot of dukkha caused by this social, collective, relational aspect, rather than just, there is the old age, sickness and death, that's definitely still going on. And there's all this much, there's also a very large amount of dukkha caused by what we do to each other and the kinds of karma we pass on and the pain that we cause. Yeah. So the reason I'm drawing that out is in these talks, I'm trying to challenge this whole notion of individualism, because I think that's a major problem in the world around us, and I think there's a danger that Buddhism becomes too individualistic as well. There are individualistic strains within the Buddhist tradition, which I think I'm trying to broaden out the picture. Yeah. So there's another kind of traditional way of looking at dukkha. Those are the two things from the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Then there's what is talked about in the Dhammacakkappavattana session. I'll just read it again. The First Noble Truth. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. Basically the sights, the first three sights. And it goes on to say, union with what is displeasing is suffering. So we can't keep away from things that we don't want to be in contact with. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. The things that we like and we want more of, we don't have control over them. They, in their very nature, will break up. If they're other people, they have minds of their own, they do things that, are not necessarily for us. Then Then there's a separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Then it says not to get what one wants is suffering. So life doesn't conform to our desires. We want things from life. We come into life with expectations and desires, often not that fully conscious, and we don't get what we want from life. That itself is suffering. Yeah. In brief, the 5 aggregates, the 5 skandhas, subject to clinging are suffering. Yeah. So this kind of breaks down neatly into this. The Buddhist tradition talks about 3 levels of dukkha, or 3 kinds of dukkha. It talks about dukkha, which is the more immediate pain of physical pain, of ill health, sickness, injury, those kinds of things. Yeah. There's a little sutta on a dart which I read a little while ago, and it has this phrase in it, which I'll just read to you. It says, "The uninstructed worldling," so that's us lot, "does not know of any escape from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure." When I read that, I thought, ow! That's the mirror being held up to me. You know, it's like when I'm in pain, what do? I reach out to grasp after some pleasurable experience. It's what we do. It's what I do. Sometimes I manage not to, and I'm a bit more aware and evolved than that. But it's just a very direct description, isn't it? The uninstructed worldling does not know of any escape from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure. Yeah, painful feelings, we grasp after something pleasurable to get us away from the pain. He goes on in that sutta to say, you know, the Aryan disciple does know of an escape from painful feeling other than grasping for sensual pleasure. So there is a way out. But anyway, that's what often we do. When we're experiencing this kind of dukkha, we just grasp. We reach out for something that's going to give us a pleasurable experience to numb or take us away from the dukkha. So in a way, what the teaching on dukkha is telling us is, don't do that. Try and be with the pain and learn from it. It is information. Yeah? Dukkha is information. Then you have the second level of dukkha, which is called viparinama dukkha. This is sometimes talked of as kind of potential dukkha. This is dukkha that we're not directly experiencing now, but we're kind of aware. So we might be having quite pleasurable experience now. We might be generally happy and fulfilled in our lives, but there's a kind of underlying anxiety or concern that we know that might change. We can't, keep our life in control in that way all the time. So even in pleasurable experiences, there's this edge of awareness that just, it's not quite right, is it? There's a little bit of angstiness or anxiety or concern that it's going to end. Yeah, that's what we call viparinama dukkha. And then there's also khandha dukkha. It's the Pali skandha dukkha. This is the suffering that's caught up with us being embodied in the human form in the way that we are. The dukkha that's tied up with the very nature of human consciousness and awareness. Yeah. So last week one of the things I took issue with in materialism was that materialism tends to it trivialises and makes superficial what being a human being is. It doesn't do full justice to the sort of heights and depths and the karmic forces that traditionally we've inherited in the human life. Yeah? And I think it's important when we talk about dukkha, if we're really going to get the proper understanding of it so that our Dharma response to it can be a genuine, full understanding, is we need to have this sense of the full range of dukkha. If we just see dukkha as being primarily about, on a material level, not getting what we want on a material level or just dealing with physical pain, actually we kind of don't do justice to our existence. we end up trivialising and making superficial our experience. And we end up with a Dharma that is trivial and superficial too. So we need to understand this deepest level of dukkha. You know, we come into this world. How and why, we don't know. But we're all here. How did we arrive here? And in arriving here and having the kind of consciousness and ways of framing and shaping our experience that we do, there is dukkha. We've kind of taken on a limiting kind of consciousness. This is what the Buddhist tradition is telling us. Only in enlightenment will we be deeply and fully fulfilled. So this skandha dukkha is talking about a kind of confinement, a tightening, a restriction, a limiting, in a way, yes, a superficial sense of, you know, being of understanding what we are in our existence. Yeah. So it's very important that we do justice to this deepest level of dukkha. Traditionally, I think this is one of the problems with, I said last week as well, secular Buddhism, for me, secular Buddhism is that form of Buddhism that's accommodated itself to materialist worldview, that understands human life as one life, understands it as primarily formed and shaped by physical processes. Yeah. Very important to understand the whole Buddhist tradition up to this new development of secular Buddhism has always accepted and taken on board the teaching of rebirth. Yeah. I'm not going to go into a big discussion about that teaching, but that has always been the Buddhist position. If you take away rebirth and you just have a one life view, you're left with let me just see how to put this. You lose this. Well, in a way, nirvana, the end that we're reaching for, is always talked about in the tradition as the end of this whole round of rebirth that we've been in over very large periods of time. Yeah, it's not just talked about as a response to the sufferings of this life. It's talked about as a response to immense sufferings over immense periods of time. So I'm going to read you a couple of bits, one bit certainly, of Dharma. I first heard this when I read the Survey of Buddhism, like in 1988 or something like that. I'll read it to you and then I'll say. So it says, which do you think is more? The flood of tears which, weeping and wailing, you have shed upon this long way, hurrying and hastening through the round of rebirths, united with the undesired, separated from the desired. This, or the waters of the four oceans. Long time have you suffered the death of father and mother, of sons, daughters, brothers and sisters. And whilst you were thus suffering, you have indeed shed more tears upon this long way than there is water in the four oceans. Which do you think is more? The streams of blood that through your being beheaded have flowed upon this long way, these or the waters of the four oceans. Long time have you been caught as robbers or highwaymen or adulterers, and through your being beheaded, verily, more blood has flowed upon this long way than there is water in the four oceans. So when I first read this, it had a very strong impact on me. I can only describe it. I just had an intuitive response to what is being said. Yeah. So it's describing, through so many rebirths over so much time, you shed more tears in this life, these lives. You shed more blood than there is water in the four oceans. Yeah. So that's the backdrop of the Buddhist tradition. That's the way it's always seen human life, not just as an individual one life thing, but as the manifestation of karmic forces that have been going on over a very long period of time. Yeah, so this, I don't know what effect that has for you, just hearing that, but that had a very strong effect on me. It's like it gave expression to a very, very deep sense of suffering that I felt in my life. Somebody was actually articulating it. Yeah, I can't say it's a sort of an intuitive thing. It's, you know, can't sort of make sense of it rationally. But that is the traditional backdrop of the Dharma. Yeah. And I think if we start to tinker with that and we dismiss rebirth, we diminish the whole understanding of dukkha, that changes our whole understanding of what the Dharma is too. Yeah? So those are some of the traditional forms. We're looking at dukkha this week. We're going to be moving on and we're going to see other things, but this is the very sobering thing. What the Dhammacakka Pavartana Sutta says is the first noble truth is to be understood. It says the second noble truth is to be abandoned, craving is to be abandoned, nibbana is to be realised, and the path is to be developed. We need to understand dukkha. Yeah? It is information. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time exploring I'm not quite sure how to put it, like a contemporary interpretation of dukkha from a Buddhist point of view. So I'm going to look at the work of someone called Joanna Macy. Joanna Macy, if you haven't come across her before, I think she's still alive. She's probably fairly old now. She's a Buddhist and she's been an activist for a long time in terms of engaging with social, political, environmental issues. She's quite a famous figure. She's travelled the world and done a lot of workshops around the world. She wrote a book some time ago now called Mutual Causality in Buddhism and General Systems Theory. Nice, snappy little title, eh? Mutual causality is her word for her translation of Praticca Samutpada. So if you've been around the Dharma for a while, you've probably heard this phrase, Praticca Samutpada, or conditioned co-production is the more usual translation of it. Joanna Macy did a whole lot of research and came up with this view that actually it meant something much more like mutual causality, that there's a mutual effect one upon the other in all these conditions. Something that's not fully accepted. There's debate about this in the Buddhist tradition, but that's her reading of it. But she talks about so it's based on an understanding that we are ultimately connected with all life, yeah, and it's, you know, separating ourselves from that truth is part of how we cause a lot of dukkha for ourselves and then consequently through our actions for others, yeah. So it's based on a notion of interconnectedness. This is a teaching that develops in the Mahayana, notions of emptiness and compassion and mutual interpenetration of all things. So she talks about a dukkha as when we, because we have this interconnectedness, because we can't just see ourselves as separate individuals, you know, which is this individualism that I'm trying to explore, we can't help but feel pain for what's going on in the world around us. We are connected with it. It's natural to feel a pain and a sympathy for what's going on in the world. You have this this term in early Pali Buddhism called anukampa, sometimes translated as compassion, which literally means to shake with. You know, it's this kind of thing. It's actually natural to feel for others, to feel for what's going on in the world. Kri, the word that's sometimes translated as shame, is, you know, this is the bit that develops ethical sensitivity in us. That's also just a natural thing to feel shame. We distort it and we cover it over, but these are natural things. So Joanna Macy's exploring, in a way, what causes us to cut off from that connection with the world, that feeling for the world. She talks about this word apathy. Apathy comes from the Greek apatheia, which literally means non-suffering. But she talks about apathy as this inability to feel our pain for the world that we live in. Yeah? We kind of cut ourselves off from it. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. She's got quite she explores it in some depth, and I'm not going to be able to do full justice to it. She looks at, these are what causes this repression and avoidance, what causes us to cut off from our underlying natural sense of connection with the world and with others, other beings in the world. Yeah? So she comes up with this, these are all things that lead us to avoid this. Yeah? So she says, viewing pain as dysfunctional and a sign of failure. So in a way, this is what I have alluded to earlier. When we say dukkha equals failure, we don't want to be failures, so we kind of pull back from it. We don't really acknowledge it. We don't see it as a truth in some way. Yeah? But these are views that we have around, that we ought to be able to triumph over dukkha kind of on its own terms, without the full Buddhist, deeper perspective on dukkha. And she talks about wanting to avoid despair. We don't want to be overwhelmed by it all. Actually, the sufferings of the world, they're large. And we don't want to feel the despair of that. Again, we can see despair as a kind of failure, so we back off from it. Yeah? There's spiritual individualism. The view that, in a way, the spiritual life is just me finding answers for my own dukkha. Yeah? That can lead us to... It's a sort of a rationale for not engaging with the sufferings of the world. There's distrust of our own perceptions in favour of so-called experts. So, we look at what's going in the world and we sort of have some intuitive sense of a response to that and what's going on, but we think, well, we can't know. There are experts who must know better than us. So again, we sort of back off from our own perceptions of that. We don't trust them. There's fear and avoidance of guilt about our part in the world's sufferings. So we can feel unconsciously or semi-consciously that we can feel a sense of guilt and shame that we caused this in some way, and we don't want to experience that guilt. So again, we back off. Yeah. There's what she calls individualism, that sees our feelings of solidarity with others as imaginary, pathologizing them in psychological terms as unresolved developmental issues. Yeah? So she's saying that there are views in our society, maybe coming from different places, that actually say that any feeling of solidarity, of connection with the world, is just your pathological problem. It's not natural. You shouldn't have it. Actually, individualism's the right way. So that kind of, again, it numbs us, it dulls us, it cuts us off from feeling for the world. There's the culture of distraction and entertainment, which she says leads to hijacked attention. So we just engage in distraction, look for entertainment. This is part of the only way I know how to deal with painful feeling is grasp for something pleasurable. And we do that. And it just kind of leads to an inability to actually concentrate and stay with what's going on. She talks about this fear of powerlessness, How can I do anything about the world's problems? And not having immediate or easy solutions is difficult for us because we're taught that we should be able to find responses to triumph over adversity in all cases, yeah. So that fear of powerlessness, to be with the fact that we can't immediately solve all this dukkha, that can be challenging. Fear of knowing and speaking out about taboos. If you've got a feeling that things are not going well in the world and that we should be responsive to that, you can fear speaking out about that because you're going to be socially disapproved of. Yeah? There are also job and time pressures. There are other things as well. But she looks at all of these things. They end up causing us more pain. They lead to a shutting down of our ability to empathise with others, our ability to imaginatively connect with others. Yeah. They lead to a whole sort of further sense of suffering. Yeah. So I think what I want to do is sort of encourage us to turn towards this area of what I'm calling the collective relational aspect of dukkha, and acknowledge that it's there. You know, it might be impacting on our lives very directly, or we might just be perceiving and experiencing it going on in the world around us, knowing that others are suffering as a result of other human beings' actions. Yeah. So it's something about sort of turning towards this and taking the, I don't know what it's like, the scales off our eyes, the shutters away, and actually starting to look at this. If we don't learn to do this, if we don't learn to turn towards dukkha, see it as information, we build our lives on a false premise. Yeah? And all our attempts at whatever we're doing are based on a kind of a mistruth. This is what I understand the truth of, noble truth of dukkha to be saying. Yes, we need to understand it, turn towards it, understand it, take away the sense of blame or failure that we're experiencing dukkha, and then we can experience a certain kind of relief of like, this is how it is. I'm not the only one who's experiencing this. We all experience it. It's the way of things in this world that we live in. Yeah? I think I'm going to leave it there. There's other, as usual, I've got more material than I can do justice to, but it's 25 past. I'd like to open it up a little bit to something. I don't think we'll go into groups. It's probably not quite enough time. But I'd like to open it up for a bit of discussion and questions to see. Yeah, does that sound good? So Jake has immediately put his hand up.
I'm just thinking that, yes, I've understood what you said, and it's an interesting thing to address, and seeing as information is really interesting. But there is, I think, a danger that you can be overwhelmed by it.
Sure.
I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, just on an immediate pragmatic level, if you feel yourself overwhelmed by it, you need to resource yourself in whatever way, you know, whether that's through doing more metabhavana practice, through spending time with people who are in a more positive state than yourself, that can give you perspective on it. I mean, yeah, there's no virtue in just being overwhelmed. There's no virtue in that in Buddhism. In the course of these talks, we're going to move on and look at the other truths. So, you know, tonight we are looking at dukkha, the first truth. So I'm dwelling on that. I'm not kind of looking at the ways forward and out of that. We'll look at that as we go on in these talks. But yeah, if you need to resource yourself in whatever way you particularly find helpful. What I said a bit about truth last week, you know, my own experience, sometimes we invest a lot of energy in avoiding the truth. I think actually that's quite a fundamental human sort of state. We're avoiding really facing the truth. So my own experience is sometimes actually hearing the truth, I'm not always as overwhelmed as I think I might be. There's actually an element sometimes of relief. I've heard something. So I think when I read that little bit about, you know, the amount of tears you shed in these lives and all of that, I was trying to describe it, you know, I heard a truth in that, and it was a relief to hear that truth articulated, because I hadn't been able to articulate it before. So whilst I think it's important to resource ourselves and to go and do what we need, we need to be in a positive state. I don't want to. I don't think we should always treat ourselves with kid gloves. Sometimes there is just a reality to be faced, and sometimes we've got greater resources than we might think as well. I don't want to kind of think, oh no, we shouldn't go there, because that can get too precious at times, I think. And you also need to keep yourself resourced, and we all have to work out where that balance is for ourselves. We have to work that out. It's not something static, it's dynamic. We have to work that out over time. Sometimes we might need to do more resourcing of ourselves, and other times, look clearly at it. But yeah, I don't want. That's why I chose the thing Challenging Dharma. The Dharma is not just a kind of reassurance or a comfort blanket. The Dharma is challenging. It's saying our life is challenging. There's no getting around it. So we have to face it. So yes, I hope that's of help. I don't know. But I sometimes think we err too much on the side of, shouldn't go there, shouldn't go there. But it's like, well, life just goes on. Life is difficult. It's tough, And we have the strength and resources to face that. Sometimes you don't know what resources you've got until you actually start to face stuff. So I want to encourage that as well, but not in a way that overrides, if you are overwhelmed, you do need to look after yourself too.
When you say that, I think that, shutting off through, protection, so in other words, going through that, closing off in protection mode, actually gives more suffering than just opening up and growing through the pain.
Can do, yeah.
It's facing that suffering, being comfortable in that suffering with that pain. I agree, and I'm now going to put the other case for myself. I think there are also times when I'm just thinking about my own experience of dealing with this violence from my childhood. At the time I couldn't deal with it, and for a long time I repressed it. There was complete repression. Repression meaning I wasn't even aware that I'd repressed it. I was able to let it in when I felt safe enough to deal with it. So I think there is also that dynamic, that some things we do need the resources around. These are all decisions the individual has to make for themselves in the end. Sammy, sure.
Yeah, I wasn't here at your last talk, but thanks for a bit of the summary, particularly the Margaret Thatcher, and how you clarified that there was two poles and the extremities that you defined, and you mentioned Margaret Thatcher's statement about society, and when you described a bit about not having, about the idea of, she was suggesting that there wasn't, and you called it individual responsibility. But there is individual responsibility, and the other extreme was that there wasn't, and I was thinking of translating, including autonomy. So bearing in mind those two extremes that you described, and you told us about Joanna Macy's book on mutual causality. If you put yourself in Joanna Macy's shoes, what do you think she'd say to Margaret Thatcher's definition of that statement about not being society?
Well, I won't put. My own response to Margaret is I don't agree with her view. I think it's an extreme view. From the perspective of the Dharma, it's not true. It's not accurate. And somebody did send me a link to a talk by Margaret Thatcher, which she gave, or something about Margaret Thatcher. She actually was advocating environmentalism at the end of her premiership, which is very interesting to hear. So she thought that Conservatives, this is getting into a bit of political stuff, but she thought the Conservatives had a duty to be stewards of the earth. But she didn't seem to see the contradictions in her own thinking, that she'd unleashed this profit-driven deregulation that just allowed individual greed to go forth and flourish without any restrictions. And she didn't seem to see the contradiction between upholding an environmental awareness and this unrestrained promotion of profit, short-term profit and greed. She didn't seem to be aware of that. So I don't know what Joanna Macy thinks. You'd have to ask her, but I don't agree with that because I think it's an extreme view. I also don't agree with the other extreme, that there's no individual responsibility and that people commit crimes purely on the basis of they had this kind of conditioning and that they have.
There's a mutual causality.
Sorry?
There's a mutual causality.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I see we're the product of conditions, aren't we? If someone has very difficult conditions, doesn't mean that they can't free themselves from those or, overcome them. But it is going to be a lot more difficult than someone who's got very positive conditions. So that's more the middle way between these two extremes. Whether that is mutual, I think the mutual causality idea is slightly different from that thing of those two extremes and finding the middle in it. Mutual causality is about, us all being connected in a certain kind of way, and that cutting ourselves off from that causes dukkha in itself, I mean, so it's a particular, Joanna Macy is a particular interpretation of the Pali text, which quite a few other people wouldn't agree with. But I think, you can look to the later tradition, the Mahayana tradition of wisdom, emptiness and compassion, and I think that supports Joanna Macy's case. So I think that as a way of countering individualism, I personally tend towards agreeing with Joanna Macy's approach. I don't know if that's quite what you're getting at. Maybe you're still getting at some other point, aren't you?
I was thinking about the overwhelm thing.
Overwhelming, yeah.
About getting overwhelmed by suffering. And I'm kind of wondering if it's still a bit of a product of the individualism that we're raised with.
Right, yeah.
Because it's like, everybody has their own experience of suffering, their own particular history, as well as, seeing generalised suffering. But there's something about, there's an image that I'm not quite sure where it comes from, and the image is of a vessel that's smashed, and everybody has a fragment of that vessel, and that vessel is kind of human suffering. And we've all got our bits of it, but actually there's a way we can think that this is what it's like to be human, and I've got this bit and you've got that bit, and we also see what's out there. And there's something about leaning into solidarity of what it is to be human that I think kind of helps counteract that overwhelm. It's not for me to deal with all the suffering in the world. It's not for you. So there's something about a more
It's us. It's for us to do.
Into a more collective response that this is ours and we're together, because we are together. I do think the environmental crisis does kind of highlight that, maybe very particularly, that we're kind of together and it's ours. And there's something about that solidarity that I think helps to counteract this. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Well, you're not on your own. We're together, and I think that's. Maybe that can be helpful and for us to learn to lean into that, because we're not raised to lean into that.
No.
That's not what our culture's kind of taught us to do.
That's right. So in the fourth talk, which would usually be about the Eightfold Path, that's the fourth of the Noble Truths, I'm going to talk about Sangha, bodhicitta, third order of consciousness, as a spiritual practice. I think it goes against the grain of our whole society and the way that the individualism is so deeply rooted in our whole approach to life. So that's what that's the answer. It's not me taking on the sufferings of the world on my own. It's creating a collectivity, a sangha that can do something about it. And I think if you're connected with others in that work, it is much less likely to be overwhelming. So thanks for that. That's why I'm going to. I think that's the answer. I think that's what the Dharma is for our times. A lot of it is about Sangha. Emphasising the collectivity, this different kind of consciousness, a third order of consciousness that emerges when
individuals come together for some higher purpose. Yeah.
Take us back to something you said at the beginning about the different types of dukkha, and the first dukkha, sort of the physical suffering in the world. And I was just interested, you talked about our response is often fear of failure that around it. And I was reflecting that in my work in a hospital, what I see is not failure, fear that people think that they're a failure if they have dukkha. It's that they must have done something wrong, and a blame, either blaming somebody else or blaming themselves because this is not how it's supposed to be. So there must be a reason for dukkha, and the reason must be that I've done something wrong. And how it's really challenging and painful to see that, and how to work with that with people, and the notion that it's just suffering, not it's just suffering, but it's suffering and it's part of what it is to be human. It's very difficult for people to get their heads around because our culture says there must be a reason. I must have done something wrong. So I was just reflecting on that.
Anybody here suffer from that?
Sorry, on the back of what you were saying actually, is there's a culture of now of blame within the health system actually that I've experienced myself because I've got ME. And it was you have done something to get to this point. You have got yourself stressed to get to this point. So just on the back of that really speaks to me actually.
Do you think that might come from within the Christian tradition though? Because the idea that, is God is seen as a protector, and if God isn't used, if something awful happens to you, then God hasn't been protecting you. It must be for a reason that
God's will in some way.
Yeah, and that you've done something wrong, and that sort of, given that how deeply ingrained the Christian tradition is in certainly British and European society, that it's that sort of idea that there's no causality. The causality is there's nothing. You can't. It's this idea, this sort of mystical thing that you've done something to displease the gods. It's sort of,
there may be something in that. I haven't thought that through, but there may be something in that. I mean, I resonate with what you're saying. That's what I felt was I've had this long legacy with the violence and difficulties with my nervous system and all sorts of that sense that I've done something wrong that's created this, and everybody else has got it right. It's just an unconscious kind of assumption that we can make. Does anybody else? Does that resonate with anybody else here? That what Saccanama was saying? Put your hand up if that does. Certainly, some of us anyway. It's like somehow it's our fault. Our suffering is our fault.
Yeah, we say things. What have we done to deserve a son like this, or we all said that. Even what have we done to deserve it? It's just the way it is.
I suppose what Buddhism encourages us to do, isn't it? It's not our fault in that way, but we do have to take responsibility for it.
But I think that's a different thing, isn't it? It's quite subtle, but
if you trace the causes back, then you will be able to unpick why it's happened. Possibly.
It's getting on for 1:45. I did receive one written question from somebody, but it's a bit of a sort of technical point that would take us in a slightly different direction. Is that all right? Not to address that. But if anybody does want to write, whoever's got questions or thoughts coming up from this, please do write, and I'll try and weave it in and address it in the talks as they unfold. This one I will put up on the website as well. Saccanama suggested at the end of last week that it'd be nice just to finish with the transference of merit and self-surrender, just as a way of collectively just doing something. So we'll do in call and response, but some people won't know it, but just as a way of ending what we're doing. So this verse is just a verse expressing the kind of bodhisattva ideal, I suppose you would say, very simply put. And we'll just do it in call and response.
to the transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences. My possessions. And my merit in all three ways. I give up without regard to myself. For the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space. So may I become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.